Thanks for joining us today. You've tuned into Business Daily, and I'm Lee-Ji-Yoon in Seoul. Before we get started, let's first get a quick check on today's highlights. A grim outlook for Korea's exports as local research institutes predict the country's outbound shipments to nosedive 4 to 6% this year compared to last year. Recent comments from Korea's top central banker has ignited debate about redenomination. Is the country in need of a currency reform? We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. Things are not looking too good for Korea's already struggling exporters. Local economic institutes predict the country's exports will decline at levels unseen since the global financial crisis. Our Kim Min-ji has this report.
Korea is expecting its worst report card for exports since the 2008 global financial crisis. Local research institutes are predicting Korea's exports will plunge between 4 and 6% for this year compared to a year ago. The Bank of Korea has also previously voiced concerns about the country's slowing exports, saying that it could hurt Korea's economic recovery. If their predictions come true, it would mark Korea's worst performance since the aftermath of the global financial crisis, when exports tumbled 14% on year. Korean exports have already been on a downward trend this year, and in the second half, the figures are expected to worsen. In August, exports fell 14.7% from the year before, the biggest rate of decline in 6 years. Things aren't expected to get any better in September, as exports in the first 20 days of the month has only amounted to $27.7 billion, a decline of more than 6% from the previous year. The weak performance is attributed to slow growth in the overall global economy, and especially the slowdown in China, Korea's main trading partner. Barclays predicts Beijing will only grow 6% next year, down from 6.6% this year, while some are also revising down their outlooks to the 5% range. Analysts say Korea may have to brace for its worst-case scenario, as the global economic downturn is expected to continue for some time. Korean exporters are also feeling the blow from China's currency devaluation last month, and Korea's petrochemical industries are still suffering from the effect of low global oil prices. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
With major holidays coming up in the next few weeks, Korea expects a large number of Chinese tourists to visit the country. Now, the concern is that this also opens the door for counterfeit money to flow into the country. Our Lee Ju-young tells us why.
The People's Bank of China recently announced it will introduce brand new 100 renminbi banknotes, currently the biggest denomination of the Chinese currency, on November 12th. This comes as part of Beijing's efforts to stem counterfeiting, which cost the government over $80 million last year. But concerns are on the rise that counterfeiters will release a large sum of fake money before the new bills are rolled out, and that Korea may be exposed to the dangers. According to data compiled by the 6 leading commercial banks in Korea, the number of counterfeit cases saw a sudden surge, with 43.6% occurring in the past 3 months out of the total on record so far this year. Authorities are concerned these figures will only go up, as the country is expecting a large influx of Chinese tourists this Chuseok holiday in about a week from now, and China's National Day, which is coming up in early October. But they say by paying the right amount of attention, people can pick out counterfeit notes.
Counterfeit yuan bills are less elaborate. On authentic notes, the portrait and digits are quite clear under the light, but on counterfeit money, they look blurry.
The new yuan note will be upgraded with anti-forgery security features, making it virtually impossible to duplicate with existing technology. The existing 100 yuan note will stay in circulation following the new edition for the time being. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
At a parliamentary audit last week, the issue of currency redenomination surfaced, with ruling party lawmakers stepping up their calls for a currency reform. Take a look.
A redenomination is carried out to change the currency unit while leaving the value it holds as is. And just last week, Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said he agrees with lawmakers that Korea may need a currency reform amid deflation worries and low growth. With Korea being the only country among 34 OECD member nations whose currency tops 4 digits per US dollar, there have been increased calls for a currency reform. Ruling party lawmakers have said this will not only help boost the domestic economy, but also bring the shadow economy into the open by flushing out cash underground and exchanging it into new banknotes. But there are concerns this might result in more inflationary pressure, as well as increase the burden on the economy, as it will have to foot a significant bill to replace existing financial technology systems.
And to tell us more about this, we're now joined by Professor Chuseok from the Catholic University of Korea in the studio with us today. So good to see you, Professor.
Happy to be here.
All right, so the currency ratio between the US dollar and the Korean won is roughly $1 to 1,000 won. How does this currency unit compare to other countries?
Well, if you look at, say, the 20 or 30 major currencies, there's very few currencies which have more than 1,000 units per dollar. Mongolian tulak has something like 1990 tulaks per dollar. Indonesia rupee has about 14,400 per dollar. Vietnamese dong has about 23,000 per dollar. So there's very few currencies which have higher units than Korean won. But having said that, if you go back to, say, 1980s, the Italian lira, before it became a part of the euro, it went up to as high as 2,000 liras per dollar.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's not unprecedented. But most major currencies right now are, they have between 0 to 10 units per US dollar.
All right. Well, it's not unusual to see Korean restaurants marking their prices without all the zeros. For example, if a noodle costs around 5,000 Korean won or for $4 US, then the menu would have it marked as 5.01. Does this show the need of redenomination is on the rise?
Well, it does feel like some of the zeros are unnecessary. But on the other hand, you have a lot of other menus where that 50 won or 100 won is important. And a lot of concern is that, well, if we redenominate and we do not allow things like, well, American cents, where you have 1/100th of a won or 1/100th of a fun or whatever the unit is going to be, it may spark higher inflation because you're lopping off some relevant numbers and replacing them with 0.0. Also, having said that, if you go back through the 1960s, Korean won used to be worth about 200 or 300 won per dollar.
Right.
And Japanese yen was actually around the same unit. So what ultimately decides the unit in the long run is inflation. And if Korea, well, in the 2000s, Korean inflation rate and the US inflation rate were not that different. But in the past, Korean inflation rate was much higher than the US, which is why we have such large units per US dollar. So if Korea ever gets on a higher inflation path, then we may need to redenominate again maybe 20, 50 years in the future.
All right. Well, this is not the first time that the talks of redenomination or currency reform have surfaced, though.
Yeah. Well, if you go back into history far enough, Korea denominated its currency in the 1950s, but that was during wartime.
Okay.
And then 53 and 62. But both of those times, there were not only redenomination, but a large-scale currency reform. Usually, if you look at countries which perform a currency reform, they redenominate because they want to cut inflation. And the way they do that is not only they introduce a new currency, but they limit the amount of old currency that can be converted into new currency. So that's how they control inflation, or try to. But in Korean case right now, there's no real need for controlling inflation. So it'll be just cosmetic. How many zeros do we lop off?
Okay. Well, but then if we do go ahead with a currency reform or a redenomination, what kind of positive effects can we expect from that?
Well, right now, it's mostly, I think, cosmetic in nature. Because we have so many zeros, some people think it doesn't look good. Other people are concerned that, well, when you look at, say, budgets of large companies or budgets in Korea, you're just going to have so many zeros at the end which do not give relevant information that it's just going to waste a lot of space without giving relevant information that people need. And as we have well, inflation is very low, but it's not zero, so it's going to continually rise. So they think that maybe it'll be better to just cut some zeros now to save some space and allow the prices to rise again in the future without too much of a problem.
All right, then let's look at a case in some developing nations where they reform their currencies to flush out their money. Does this actually work, and would it be relevant to Korea as well?
Okay, well, in those developing countries, if, say, there's a lot of black market and people keep cash around, one way of cutting that black market is to introduce a new currency. And again, you only allow limited amount of old currency to be exchanged into new currency. What that does is it renders a lot of that old money useless, so that black marketeers are out of luck. In Korea right now, I don't think that's relevant because, first of all, Korean black underground economy doesn't seem to be as large as a lot of these emerging economies. And what happens in those cases is, well, you've basically eliminated a lot of people's wealth. The money that used to have value in the past no longer has value. So if we run a currency reform like that, then you're actually cutting consumption while we need it. So if we do have a currency reform redenomination, chances are we're not going to let only a limited amount of money change, but let everybody change whatever cash they have into a new currency.
All right. Also, there are going to be a lot of costs involved and a lot of confusion if we do go ahead with the currency reforms. Are there any other negative effects, I guess, that could come with this reform?
Well, if you remember, actually, I think the best time for us to have a redenomination, if you wanted it, was actually in 2007.
2007?
When we introduced new currency. If you remember, because of counterfeiting worries, we sort of changed the old 10,000 won, 5,000 won notes into new ones. All we had to do was just lop off some zeros back then. But as long as you introduce new currencies, new denomination, some people are going to be confused. This will be an interesting experiment. If people really are rational economic men, as textbook assumes, they're not going to change anything because the same number of zeros has been cut off from prices as well as their pay and their wealth.
Right.
But traditionally, there has been some people who get confused.
Okay.
So they overspend, but I'm not quite sure if that's the type of consumption that we want or need.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in today, Professor.
Thank you.
The average age of a corporate executive in Korea is 53 and a half. Market researcher Korea CXO Institute says this is the average of nearly 7,000 registered and unregistered executives at the country's top 100 conglomerates. The data were compiled through the company's half-term reports and do not include financial groups. The age group that makes up the largest proportion at nearly 45% is between 51 and 55 years old. Now, the oldest executive is 93-year-old Lotte Group founder Shin Gyuk-ho, and the youngest is 32-year-old Korean Air Executive Vice President Cho Hyun-min. The average age tends to be lower in the IT, communication, and electronics industries, while the automobile, construction, and the steel industries mostly tap older executives with more experience. Despite the slow economy, some of the busiest spots in the country right now are probably delivery houses. This is because the season of gift giving is well underway ahead of this year's Chuseok holiday. Our Eunice Kim takes us to the hustle and bustle.
It's that time of the year. Stacked top to bottom in trucks, boxes get loaded in, slid onto a conveyor belt, sorted, and packed into smaller vehicles that will take them to their final destination all over the capital region. As this year's Chuseok, or Korean Thanksgiving holiday, intersects with the fall harvesting season for farm produce and regional specialty products, this year's incoming delivery volume looks to swell by 20% compared to last year. This distribution center, which usually sees 5 11-ton truck worth of packages come through daily, is already reporting a 30% growth. And many of those orders come from here, a bustling discount retailer, which has set up a delivery assistance corner as more and more customers opt to mail their gifts this year.
The staff are there to ensure a smooth delivery, from proper packaging to correct addresses.
A courier makes a home delivery. He takes special care, knowing the contents represent special wishes for family members or friends who would not be visited this year.
There are challenges since Chuseok gifts tend to be larger and need to be delivered quickly.
The peak delivery time is expected to be early this week, as Korea counts down to the Chuseok holiday. Experts say other delivery inquiries are best directed to post offices or 24-hour marts. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
All right, that wraps it up for today, but we'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye for now.